And hello again, and welcome to another of these lecture video things that I like to do. In this case, we're going to be looking at realism in literature. This is LC Lupus, or at least that's the name that I go by. So, let's dive straight into realism in literature, specifically. So, realism is very simply types of literature that try to, in some way, emulate reality. They try to copy reality, to reflect it more closely, right? So the idea is that it is written in an attempt to mirror reality, right? It is trying to be, this is also why anything that is realistic will try not to incorporate elements into it that are in some way against reality. So you're not really going to get things like magic, for instance, in something that is realist. You're not going to get anything that's usually overly ridiculous and fun. So when you're reading something that is a realist text, you're essentially expected to understand that that is what the text is doing, that it is trying to mirror reality. It's basically trying to be mimetic in a sense. It's trying to imitate what is real. Now, the thing is, a very, very basic, simple thing, is that any realist text is not actually realistic. It is copying and trying to appear to be realistic, but it cannot necessarily, do this all the time. Because now, when we often do think of the ideas of like, how do we do something more realistic, we often have this idea of show, don't tell, right? So you get this idea of like, you should show things rather than telling them. So show it, which isn't necessarily, needed for something to be a realist work, but it's the kind of thing that you can often see within texts that are trying to be realist texts. They will try to, rather than having characters talk about things, they will have characters show, or they'll just have the narration showing things, right? Now, the thing is, you're never told, when you start reading a realist text, you're never told, hey, listen, this text is realistic. You're not told that. That is not something that you are informed about. Instead, it is something that you are expected to understand, because you're expected to understand the codes present within the text that in some way present this to you, right? You're never explicitly told. You are just expected to understand. Now, what makes this quite interesting is that this essentially assumes a kind of competence on the part of the reader. That the reader is someone who is capable of understanding this as, something that occurs. That the reader is somebody who understands that what is being written is not necessarily real, but is trying to be real, right? The only text that would be truly real in that sense would be non-fiction books, documentaries, etc. But even there, they will often make use of things like narrative framing to make it more engaging to read. Nothing is truly realist, right? Now, the reason for this also is because the real world actually has an infinite number of details. There is a myriad of things in the real world that make it real. And there is no way that you will ever be able to incorporate all of them. It's physically impossible. Because think about, say, the world, right? When you look outside of the natural world, and you go, oh, look, there's the forest, and there's the river, right? Let's just say there's a landscape, a pretty landscape, where you can see a river flowing through the trees. And you might say, oh, well, the main elements here are that there's a beautiful river, and that there is, that lovely forest, and there's the sky, all nice and blue above it all. And there's some clouds. That's minute detail. Even if you were to draw that, even if you were to see a painting that was perfectly realistic, the thing is, it's not. Because in reality, what to the human eye from a distance, even if you have 20/20 vision, it looks like individual trees merge together to become the forest. But in the real world, Each of those trees is singular, and each of those trees is made up of bark and leaves that are individuals, and even within, say, leaves, there are specific parts of a leaf that you will not be able to see from far away. Even if you have perfect vision, you can't see the sort of the veins of leaves that run through them, because that's a minute detail that you only can really see up close. So reality has all of these things. You just don't notice most of them. Also, of course, reality takes into account a lot of things all at once. Well, it doesn't take into account, it just is these things all at once, but we can only really take account of certain things. So reality, you are constantly smelling, seeing, tasting, touching all the time. You can't show that in a book. You can't constantly be like, okay, cool, let's talk about what this place smells like. A lot of the time, texts tend to focus on visuals, and then if there is some kind of an important sound or smell, it will mention those. But most texts usually focus on visuals. What does it look like? But what something looks like is hardly real life. When you think of a forest, you don't just think of what it looks like. If you're in a forest, there's a smell to the forest. There's the sounds of the forest. And there's also the way it changes as all sorts of things happen. Maybe there's a wind rolling through, which slowly rattles things in a different way. So the world is a highly objective place, even if we can't perceive all of it. But texts, anything that's made by humans, is going to be subjective. We might be trying to present the world, but that does not actually mean that what we are presenting incorporates all of it. So a realist text is something that's just trying. It's trying its best. It's doing its little hardest to be realistic, even if it actually isn't. It will, no matter what, it will always fall flat, right? So the idea is that a text cannot truly be a reflection of reality. And the reason for this is because it requires the use of very, very subjective codes, right? It requires certain codes that are that are created by people. How do people write texts, right? How are they writing it? Are they writing it to make use of certain things? Like, if I want to present an image of the natural world, I'll start using a lot of visual codes, right? So I'll be like, oh, this is what it looks like. This is blah, 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 blah. But as I said, that's not all of it. So maybe I'll also incorporate some smells into my text. And then I'll make you think of the smell of a forest. But then there's also the sound. So let's say I also add that. But what if I forget something? What if I don't add in that feeling of walking in a forest? And even if you're wearing shoes, you can feel the breaking of twigs and leaves under you. You can actually feel them. And if you pay attention to them, they have a very, very distinct sensation to sort of everything else that's around you. But that's not seeing, that's not smelling, that's not any of those kind of things. It's feeling, and it's a very personal feeling, right? If you just run, you will feel it less than if you were to walk slowly and actually hear the crunching of things underneath your feet. But you can also, it's not only hearing them, but you also can actually feel them underneath your feet, because the ground is not level, so it crunches underneath you, and your feet are actually constantly adjusting to it. But these are tiny details that you can't be expected to incorporate all of these. Even something like, say, a film. Even if it's filmed the natural landscape, there are things that are excluded, right? Because we don't know about these feelings or anything else like that. We're being presented with an image of realism. So, if you are writing an essay about a realist text, you need to pay attention to these kind of things. What is it doing to make it seem realist? Remember that it's not actually real. It is a reflection of reality. So some techniques are often used, and these are, if you're going to be writing an essay, for instance, about realism in texts, there are some terms you need to use. For instance, verisimilitude and naturalization. These are kinds of terms you should use. There are others that you can also incorporate. Because, for instance, say semiotics, which I've done videos about semiotics, about various semiotic models. If you want to look at those, have a look at them. But the thing about, say, semiotic models is that they reflect our cultural understandings of things, right? So when we see a tree is a natural thing, but what does a tree represent to us? Right? We have a subjective perspective on trees. We will see trees, for instance, as being symbolic of life. They are life-giving, they are nurturing, they're part of Mother Nature. But the thing is, the natural world doesn't think, so it doesn't have a particular perspective it has on trees. A tree is an objective thing, which is a type of organism that lives off of water and sunlight, and it has a particular, maybe not desires, but it has preferences for certain stimulus versus others. A tree doesn't want to be hacked to pieces. It wants to be able to, but it, in terms of its preferences as an organism, would not want to be cut down, right? But that is, a whole other thing. That is a subjective interpretation that we have of objective reality. So, some terms like verisimilitude, right? Verisimilitude means that you're writing sort of in a way in which you're following the rules of life, right? So there's not going to be magic. There's not going to be, random things. Well, there could still be random things, but we're describing life as it is, not grand adventures and whatever. We're usually focusing on the life of people. So it's following these kinds of rules. And then naturalization is sort of using the many different codes to create a sense of reality that can change between things, like between period and period and text and text. It can change and do these kind of things. So that is, in a nutshell, sort of a realism in texts and how it can be used and adopted and whatever. So cool. So the thing to remember when it comes to realist texts in general is that realist texts are things that they appear, they seem to be real, but they're not. They are a reflection of reality. And also, of course, reflections will generally be inaccurate. They're not perfectly accurate representations of the thing. They're not perfect copies of the thing. They are instead representations, right? So they are coded to seem real. But if you are looking at a realist text and writing about it and analyzing it, you need to break down those codes and try to decode them to understand what is the writer, filmmaker, whatever, doing to make us think that this is real. They're removing magic? Cool. They're portraying regular people doing regular things? Cool. But why are they doing those things? Why are they being realist? And then you also get offshoots of realism, things like magical realism, which will be generally realistic, but then we'll just have a tiny little splash of magic somewhere in the world. So it's treated as if it's just natural and normal, and people generally don't even pay attention to it. So that's what a realist text will do. A realist text isn't going to sit there and explain a concept to you because it's a part of the real world. They expect you to know it a lot of the time. So that is sort of realist texts in a nutshell and in very basic terms. Obviously, you can look more deeply into this, but this has been a bit of a general overview of realist text if you want to, or if you need to write an essay about realism in texts and how it can be done. And also, of course, remember that some texts can appear to be realistic but then undermine it. Right? That can happen. So you want to look at texts and try to say, how are they being realistic and how are they not being realistic? Because remember, they're not actually real, which means that they do make mistakes or purposeful decisions that make it clear that it's not actually reality. So that's what you need to look at when you do it. So that's pretty much realism. And I think I'm going to end things there. This has been LC Lupus. If you enjoyed this, do the like, comment, subscribe, whatever. And also, if you want to support this channel and whatever, check out my books, specifically my latest one, Fleshstone Blues, which is a cyberpunk story that interrogates a lot of ideas in general. It tackles ideas of, say, posthumanism and religion and consciousness and what it means to be a human in the first place. So there's lots of things that you could potentially look at if you are so inclined. If you are interested in such things, please check it out. Links in the description. My other books are also in the description. And this is the end of realism. The real world is now gone. Anyway, I hope you have a great day, week, month, and whatever else ahead. And please have a goodbye. and other things. I made a mistake that I was supposed to end on that, and then I didn't. So I'm just gonna roll with it. Just gonna roll with it, and now say, enjoy yourself. Hopefully you learned something, and goodbye.